They sold over 43 million albums worldwide. They defined a generation with anthems that made teenagers scream and parents worry. They pioneered the rock opera, smashed guitars on stages across the world, and became one of the most explosive live acts rock and roll had ever seen. Tommy alone moved over 20 million copies. Then Keith Moon died from an overdose in 1978. 11 fans were crushed to death at their Cincinnati show in 1979. John Entwistle collapsed from a heart attack in a Las Vegas hotel room in 2002. Internal tensions tore through the band for decades. Public scandals erupted that threatened to destroy reputations built over lifetimes. And decades later, even in their 70s and 80s, they're still firing band members on stage, struggling with vision loss and health issues. One original member admitted he can barely see the audience anymore. From festival seating tragedies to cocaine-fueled heart attacks, from pioneering Marshall stacks to barely being able to stand on stage, The Who went from unstoppable British mod gods to a band haunted by chaos, death, and the impossible weight of their own legacy. This is the story of how rock and roll ambition created legends and destroyed lives. A tale of 4 working-class kids from London who wanted to be heard, only to find that success came with a price tag written in tragedy. But to understand how it all fell apart, we have to go back to West London, 1964. London in the early 60s wasn't glamorous if you were working class. It was grey streets, factory jobs, and the unspoken understanding that you'd probably end up just like your parents. For kids in West London, rock and roll wasn't a dream. It was survival. Roger Daltrey was a sheet metal worker with a voice that could cut through steel. Pete Townsend was an art school student with ideas too big for his own head, influenced by spiritual teachings from Meher Baba and driven by conceptual ambitions. John Entwistle was the quiet genius on bass who could make 4 strings sound like an orchestra. And then there was Keith Moon, who auditioned for drums in 1964 and played so violently the band knew immediately he was the missing piece. Before they were The Who, they performed as the Detours. Then briefly became the High Numbers in 1964 to appeal to the mod scene exploding across London. The mods were sharp-dressed, scooter-riding rebels who lived for R&B and speed. The Who became their soundtrack. What made them different wasn't just the sound, it was the violence of their performances. While other bands stood politely on stage, The Who turned performances into destruction rituals. Townsend started smashing guitars. Moon kicked over drum kits. The music was loud, aggressive, angry, and it spoke to every kid who felt trapped by the system. Their early managers were Kit Lambert and Chris Stamp, who pushed them into studios and onto bigger stages. In 1965, their breakout single, I Can't Explain, hit the airwaves, produced by Shel Talmy. People were paying attention. Then came My Generation. Released as a single in 1965, it became more than a hit. It became an anthem. The stuttering vocals, aggressive bass, the raw defiance built toward one immortal line, I hope I die before I get old. That single line defined everything. It was rebellious, nihilistic, perfectly timed for a generation that didn't trust anyone over 30. Their debut album, My Generation, dropped on December 3, 1965. The Who were suddenly more than a club band. They were a movement. They were among the first rock bands to use massive Marshall amp stacks on stage, pioneering the wall of sound approach. They pushed rock toward louder, more aggressive territory. Instrument smashing became their signature. They weren't just playing music, they were waging war on stage. But even in the beginning, the seeds of destruction were already planted. The constant touring was brutal. The pressure to keep destroying instruments cost them money they didn't have. The egos were already clashing. Townsend was the conceptual genius, but Daltrey was the face. Entwistle was technically superior but relegated to the background. Moon was the uncontrollable wild card whose genius matched his appetite for chaos. The fault lines were already there. They just hadn't cracked open yet. Between 1965 and 1970, The Who went from London clubs to international superstardom. Their second album, A Quick One, arrived in 1966, featuring the mini-suite, A Quick One, While He's Away, an early experiment in long-form storytelling. Their third album, The Who Sell Out, came in 1967, using pirate radio-style jingles as a concept album structure. It was satirical, clever, ahead of its time. But beneath this triumph, something was shifting. Fans adored them. Critics were divided. Chart dominance felt hollow because they were succeeding on terms that didn't entirely feel like theirs. They were packaged, marketed, pushed onto treadmills that never stopped. What fans didn't see was the pressure building off stage. The touring was non-stop. Months on the road, different city every night, same arguments repeating. Money was rising, but so were the demands. Media wanted more interviews. Promoters wanted bigger shows, more destruction. The responsibility fell unevenly across their shoulders. And that's where the trouble began. They became part of the Monterey Pop Festival wave in 1967. By 1969, they performed at Woodstock, cementing their reputation as one of the best live rock acts of their generation. Townsend's guitar smashing reached new levels of theatricality. Moon's drumming became more manic, more dangerous. The real cost was building quietly. Moon's drinking was escalating from heavy to dangerous. Townsend's spiritual obsessions were creating distance. The band was splitting under the weight of success. Townsend was developing ideas for something bigger than just albums. Influenced by Meher Baba's teachings, by the late 60s he'd begun crafting what would become rock's first legitimate opera. Then everything changed. Released in May 1969, Tommy was their fourth studio album and a cultural earthquake. The story followed Tommy Walker, who becomes a deaf, dumb, and blind spiritual leader after witnessing trauma. It was ambitious, conceptual, and unlike anything rock had attempted at that scale. Tommy worked in ways that shocked everyone. It became their best-selling album, moving over 20 million copies worldwide and turning The Who from a successful band into cultural icons. It expanded into concerts, a 1975 film, and stage productions. The Who were no longer just guitar smashers, they were pioneers who proved rock could tell complex stories. Their success at the turn of the 70s made them one of rock's biggest bands. The 1969 to 1970 period cemented their reputation as a super live band. They were internationally famous, critically respected, and financially successful. In 1970, they released Live at Leeds, capturing the raw power of their stage show. It's widely considered one of the greatest live rock albums ever made. The energy is almost violent, every song pushing harder than studio versions. But that moment of glory was also the beginning of the end. Because while they looked unstoppable on stage, everything off stage was cracking. Keith Moon's alcohol and drug problems were spiraling. The band was exhausted from constant touring. Townsend's ambitions were growing more complex. The pressure to follow up Tommy was immense. After Tommy's success, Townsend attempted something even more revolutionary called Lifehouse, a science fiction rock opera about a dystopian future. But Lifehouse collapsed under its own complexity and internal pressures. The project was abandoned, leaving Townsend frustrated and humiliated. The songs from Lifehouse became Who's Next, released in 1971. It features Baba O'Reilly and Won't Get Fooled Again, with prominent synthesizer use that was innovative for the era. Who's Next became the only Who studio album to top the UK album chart, helping define arena rock scale and sound. In 1973, they released Quadrophenia, another massive double-album rock opera centered on mod youth identity and disillusionment. It told the story of Jimmy, a young mod struggling with mental illness. The album later inspired a 1979 cult film. Throughout the 70s, their stage show remained bombastic. Keith Moon's wild drumming was central to their on-stage chaos, the heartbeat of destruction that made everything work. Without Moon, the machine wouldn't function. Moon struggled heavily with alcohol and drug problems throughout the decade. His behavior became more erratic, more dangerous. He'd show up to gigs unable to play. He'd take combinations of pills that should have killed him. The internal strain was growing. They were trapped in a machine that demanded they keep performing, keep recording, keep destroying themselves. The chemistry that made them unstoppable was deteriorating. And then the moment everyone dreaded finally arrived. On September 6, 1978, Keith Moon died. The cause was an accidental overdose from hemynevrin, medication prescribed to combat alcoholism. The irony was crushing. He was taking medication to get clean, and it killed him. He was only 32 years old. The band was shattered. How do you replace Keith Moon? Moon wasn't just their drummer, he was their chaos engine, the reason their live shows felt genuinely dangerous. Without him, The Who were something else entirely. They recruited Kenny Jones as drummer and tried to keep going. The post-Moon lineup toured in 1979 to 1980, supporting Who Are You? But nothing felt the same. The magic was gone. And then tragedy struck again in the worst way imaginable. December 3, 1979. The Riverfront Coliseum in Cincinnati. A sellout show with 18,348 tickets sold. Festival seating meant no assigned seats. The venue only opened a few doors. Fans outside heard the soundcheck and thought the show was starting. They rushed forward. The crowd surged, crushing people against doors, against walls, against each other. Bodies piled up. People couldn't breathe. They were trampled, suffocated, crushed by thousands pushing from behind who had no idea what was happening. 11 people died in the crowd surge before The Who even took the stage. 11 fans who'd bought tickets, who were excited to see their favorite band, were dead. Most were teenagers. They died because of poor venue management, insufficient doors, festival seating policies that prioritized ticket sales over safety. When the band was told, they were devastated, but the decision was made to continue the show to avoid further panic. They played the entire concert not knowing the full extent. Afterward, when reality sunk in, it broke something in all of them. Families sued the band, promoter, and city. The lawsuit settled in 1983 with compensation paid. Cincinnati banned festival seating for decades afterward. The Cincinnati disaster became one of rock's most infamous dark tour events. It wasn't their fault, but it hung over them like a shadow. How do you keep performing when your shows have become associated with death? The combination of losing Moon and the Cincinnati tragedy broke the band's spirit. The magic was gone, replaced by grief, guilt, and exhaustion. They were going through the motions. The Who broke up in 1983 after a successful 1982 farewell tour that felt more like a funeral. It felt like the end. But rock bands never really die. They partially reunited for Live Aid in 1985, performing a set that reminded everyone why they'd been important. Then again for major shows in 1988. In 1989, they mounted a massive reunion tour with an expanded lineup. Suddenly The Who were back, not as a nostalgia act but as a vital force. In 1996, they officially reunited again, led by full Quadrophenia performances. Their 1996 to 1997 tours revived interest in their rock opera legacy and proved the material still resonated. Maybe the story wasn't over. Maybe they could reclaim what they'd lost, honor Moon's memory and the 11 who died by continuing to make music that mattered. For a brief moment, it felt like healing. Daltrey and Townsend were older, wiser, less volatile. They'd survived Moon's death, Cincinnati, and multiple breakups. The resentments seemed to have faded. The tours were successful. Reviews were positive. Fans brought their children to shows, passing down the legacy. Everything seemed stable, sustainable. But the story wasn't over. The chaos wasn't finished with them yet. On June 27, 2002, John Entwistle died in Las Vegas. He was found dead in his hotel room at the Hard Rock Hotel, hours before a major U.S. tour. The cause was a heart attack linked to cocaine use. The quiet one, the technical genius who'd held everything together for 40 years, was gone. The tour went ahead with a replacement bassist, but everything had changed. After Entwistle's death, The Who continued as a Townsend and Daltrey-led operation supported by hired musicians. The loss of 2 original members reshaped their identity completely. They weren't The Who anymore, they were 2 survivors carrying the weight of ghosts. Then in 2003, Pete Townsend faced a child pornography investigation that threatened to destroy everything. Townsend claimed he'd accessed a site as research for his autobiography and work against child abuse. He was eventually cleared of charges but placed on the sex offenders register for 5 years. The scandal damaged his public image significantly. The man who'd written anthems for youth was now tainted by controversy many fans couldn't reconcile. The Who remained a major touring act through the 2000s and 2010s despite everything. They began branding tours as a long goodbye phase, acknowledging time was running out. Their live lineup included Zach Starkey, Ringo Starr's son, on drums for decades. But in 2025, Starkey was publicly dismissed after on-stage tensions. Even after all these years, The Who still couldn't maintain internal peace. The band's brand increasingly relied on legacy hits more than new material. They became a heritage act, performing greatest hits for audiences wanting to relive their youth. There's no shame in that, but it represented a fundamental shift in what The Who were. Roger Daltrey has been the face of the modern touring era, refusing to give up even as his body failed. He's led Teenage Cancer Trust charity concerts since 2000, raising over £32 million for UK cancer care. He's tried to make the legacy mean something beyond chaos and tragedy. But in 2025, Daltrey revealed worsening vision loss on stage, admitting he could barely see audiences anymore. Townsend has cited aging and health issues affecting touring, acknowledging his body is giving out after 60 years. They've continued performing into their late 70s and 80s, but the question hangs, how much longer? In 2025, Townsend revived Quadrophenia as a ballet project, transforming the rock opera into classical dance. Quadrophenia's cultural afterlife now includes the album, film, concert tours, and ballet. The legacy evolves even as its creators struggle to function. Today, The Who are widely cited as one of the most influential rock bands in history. Their innovations shaped hard rock, gave punk its attitude, established arena performance norms every major touring act still follows. They pioneered the rock opera, proving rock could tell complex stories without losing raw power. They made destruction beautiful, turned volume into art. Tommy changed what rock music could be. Who's Next and Live at Leeds set standards bands still chase. Their influence echoes through Pearl Jam, Green Day, The Clash, Oasis, from punk to grunge to arena rock. But The Who's story is defined by more than success and influence. It's defined by the chaos behind the curtain, the price paid for glory, the bodies left behind. Keith Moon's overdose in 1978, dead at 32 from medication meant to save him. 11 fans crushed in Cincinnati in 1979, killed by poor planning. John Entwistle's heart attack in Vegas in 2002, cocaine in his system hours before tour. Pete Townshend's 2003 scandal that permanently damaged his reputation. Decades of breakups and reunions. Members firing each other in their 80s, unable to maintain peace. Success created legends and enemies. Harmony on stage hid rot behind the curtain. The system that elevated them, managers, labels, the touring treadmill, pressure to constantly destroy themselves, also destroyed them piece by piece until only 2 originals remained, carrying unbearable weight. They sold 43 million albums worldwide. They changed rock and roll forever, opened doors that can never be closed, proved working-class kids from London could create art that would outlive them. And they paid for it with everything: their health, relationships, peace of mind, and in some cases, their lives. The Who are still touring in 2025, somehow, impossibly. But every show feels like it could be the last. Daltrey can barely see the audience, performing essentially blind. Townshend's hearing is severely damaged from 60 years near massive amplifiers, his body breaking down. The legacy is intact, preserved in recordings and influence rippling through modern rock. But the men who built it are fragile, mortal, haunted by ghosts and grief. Rock and roll promised them immortality, sold them a dream of living forever through music. Instead, it gave them chaos, tragedy, addiction, legal battles, scandals, health crises, and the impossible task of carrying on when everyone else is gone. It gave them fame, fortune, and influence, but took 2 bandmates, 11 fans, their hearing, their vision, their bodies, and decades of peace. Was it worth it? The music endures. The legacy matters. But the cost was almost unbearable, and they're still paying it every time they walk on stage, performing songs written by people who aren't there anymore, facing audiences knowing their bodies might give out before the show ends. This is the story of The Who, from 43 million albums sold to chaos behind the curtain, from working-class London to worldwide fame, from my generation to barely seeing the generation in front of them. A rise that seemed unstoppable, a fall that happened in slow motion over decades, and a legacy that will outlive them all, preserved in the music, innovation, destruction, and tragedy. What part of The Who's story hits you the most? Was it Keith Moon's tragedy, the Cincinnati disaster, or watching two aging legends refuse to quit despite their bodies giving out? Did you see them live during any era? The Tommy Tours, the Quadrophenia revival, or one of their long goodbye shows? Drop your memory, your opinion, your story below. And if this deep dive moved you, hit that like button, subscribe for more stories about music's greatest legends, and let me know which band I should cover next. Because every legend has a price tag, and The Who paid it in full.